Well, 2 more inmates are scheduled to die by lethal injection next week at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute. Barring any stays from the court, Lesmond Mitchell and Keith Nelson will become the 4th and 5th federal inmates executed in 6 weeks. Adam Pinsker has more.
Those who drive along or live near US 41 and West Spring Hill Road are very likely familiar with a small group of anti-death penalty activists who spent a full week protesting the executions of 3 federal death row inmates last month.
But as a public policy, we have to ask, if we're going to have the death penalty as a balm for the wounds of murder victim families, and yet use it so infrequently.
Abe Bonowitz of Death Penalty Action says his group will be back at it again next week ahead of the scheduled executions of Lesmond Mitchell and Keith Nelson at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute. Mitchell was sent to death row 17 years ago for the 2001 murders of a grandmother and her 9-year-old granddaughter on a Navajo Indian reservation. Mitchell used the grandmother's pickup truck to drive the girl into the mountains where he stabbed her. There's a question about whether the federal government even has the authority to pursue the death penalty against Mitchell because of a law dating back to the 1800s called the Major Crimes Act. It prevents the government from pursuing the death penalty against someone who commits a crime on an Indian reservation.
The federal government still gets to prosecute that person, but it allows, unlike a state, it allows the tribal government to say, no, you may not execute our citizen.
University of Montana law professor Jordan Gross, who specializes in Native American legal issues, says the government got around the Major Crimes Act by charging Mitchell with carjacking resulting in death, which is not specifically mentioned as a death penalty crime the tribes can opt out of.
The federal government could have chosen not to charge carjacking resulting in death. They've got 2 murder charges and a whole bunch of other charges. And Mr. Mitchell would spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary.
The president of the Navajo Nation wrote President Trump asking him to commute Mitchell's sentence to life in prison. Mitchell is the only Native American currently on death row. Bonowitz says Mitchell's case is a prime example of what he calls the unequal application of the death penalty.
Because what they're really saying to the vast majority of murder victim family members is your loved one wasn't valuable enough for us to get an execution.
Even though public support for the death penalty has waned over the past decade, there are some who believe capital punishment is necessary. Sherry West, whose daughter Pamela Butler was kidnapped and raped in 1999, is among them. She plans to attend the execution of her daughter's killer, Keith Nelson, which is scheduled for August 28th.
I've been fighting a lot of years to get justice for her. So to me, I feel like this is going to be the easiest time for me because I don't have to worry about doing no more court hearings or anything after this.
West says having to go through nearly 20 years of appeals in Nelson's case has been agonizing.
He took a little girl that had a whole future ahead of her, and she didn't even get to see it, She didn't know him, and for her to be his last face that she's seen on this earth, I mean, that tears my soul apart.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Adam Pinsker.